Now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Representative Stephanie Murphy, Representative Terri Sewell, and former Chief of Staff and CAP alum Denis McDonough, as we turn to discuss some of the national security challenges. Representative Sewell. So, we got a lot to talk about, and we have probably not enough time to talk about all the challenges, from the collapse of the Middle East peace process to the violence going on in Gaza, the pulling out of the JCPOA, our nuclear agreement with Iran, the confrontations in Syria, Muqtada al-Sadr winning the election in Iraq, Russia, North Korea. We're about to confront China, maybe get into a trade war with China. So, Representative Sewell, I want to start with you and ask you, what do you think the biggest national security threats facing the country are today? And the answer cannot be the person residing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, first, let me just say it's great to be here with CAP. I'm such a big fan. I know that it's really important that we all talk about these wonderful big ideas that we have. And I also want to say that Stephanie and I did plan. We got the memo on color. But no, when I think about the biggest challenges that face us, I obviously think of North Korea. I sit on the House Intel Committee, so I would say Russia and its interference in our elections. I think that one of the things, missed opportunities for us, has been not trying to address the fact that 17 agencies said that they did meddle in our elections, and we've done nothing to sort of shore up our election integrity. Obviously, China. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think that right now, what's hot for folks back home in my district has been to talk about us pulling out of the Iran deal and what that means.
Representative Murphy.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm really delighted to be here. I'd answer that question a little bit differently, less about who we're fighting, but how we're fighting. And I think that is our biggest national security threat. We have stumbled from one continuing resolution and omnibus, basically over a decade now, which has prevented our, whether it's our intelligence institutions or our defense institutions, from making the kind of strategic investments into new innovations and technologies that we are seeing our adversaries use very adeptly to already begin to engage us in gray zone kind of conflict. And yet I don't think that cyber is a good example, and I don't know that we have, made the investments in the actual technology, but the other piece we haven't done is we haven't laid out what the ground rules, what the SOP for operating in those gray zones are. What are we as a democratic nation that has values that we use to kind of bind the way that we engage in conflict? What are we willing to do as it relates to misinformation or disinformation? A lot of those conversations haven't been had. So both on a technology perspective as well as on a policy perspective, I think we're a little short in the how we combat these threats.
Let me follow up on that. And you served in the Defense Department. It's easy for Democrats to criticize the Trump administration. There's sort of chaos. It changes almost every day, and we'll probably spin around the world and talk about a lot of the hot spots on that. But if you're talking to your constituents and they ask you, what's a Democratic foreign policy that's value-based really look like, what would you answer them? How would you answer them?
So I serve as a co-chair of the National Security Task Force for the Democratic Caucus, and part of what our organization tries to do is to put out information as well as kind of guidelines around what that might look like for our caucus. And I think our foreign policy and our national security at the end of the day has to keep our country safer and enable us to continue to pursue prosperity. And do that within the bounds of what are known to be American values. My concern with what is going on now is that it's unclear that you can articulate what the national security policy of this administration is, other than, and then you layer on this sort of confusion between appealing to a domestic political base and actually achieving national security end goals.
Dennis, let me bring you into the conversation. You're my chief. We served together in the White House. Against that standard, how would you judge the tenure of the Obama administration? Was it value-based? Was it forward-looking? What do you think contrast between the Democratic approach and what we have now?
Fair question, John. Thanks very much for the chance to be here. And I will just say, I get this is an ideas conference, and I just want to say that in many cases, personnel are policy, and I could not be more proud to be associated, John, with you and Cap, but also with these two emerging
I should have
leaders.
said Dennis is a Cap alum.
Yeah. But with these two leaders, too, I think this is evidence of the kind of debate and hard thinking that's going on among progressives, and I think it's really exciting. Look, I think as against that meter stick, I think we, historically hold up fine. But I guess I want to put a slightly different meter stick up, which is that I think there is a bit of a crisis of confidence in the West about the ideas and the principles that have shaped our foreign policy and our worldview now going back to the post-war period. And you don't see a similar lack of confidence in Beijing. And I think the lack of confidence is not well-founded. I think that recognizing the fundamental tenets of our strength, more than anything, our alliances, which are historically very unique, investing and working hard to maintain those. We ought not be experiencing the kind of crisis of confidence that we are. Part of that is from our own action, which is to say that I think our allies looking at JCPOA, the Paris Accords, how they were surprised by the decision about North Korea, all those things feed their concern about our decision making. But there are also things that we have to get our hands around here at home to restore faith in our institutions, as Terri said, and restore faith in basically the basic social contract that we've been raised up on, which is that you play by the rules, you get a fair shot.
For me, I think that when I think about a policy, I think that it's not just about military might, it's about leadership. And, what I'm scared about most about, what keeps me up at night about this administration is that we're moving away from being the premier leaders on the world stage in a host of things. Everything from climate change to the Iran deal to, reneging on promises that we've made. And I think that to me is a crisis in confidence on the world stage, but it also inures to a lack of security back home. I think that people feel that we're devoid of leadership, and when we are devoid of leadership on a global stage, China steps in, Russia steps in, and I think that to me is a meter that we should all judge our foreign policy on. Is not just our military strength, but also our leadership in the world.
Well, you noted that you serve on the House Intelligence Committee, and you've been looking at Russian intervention. Obviously, they've exploited this lack of confidence that Dennis talked about in the 2016 election, across Europe in elections over there, and with anticipation that since their return on investment was pretty high, that they're going to keep doing it. But we also had a pretty dysfunctional investigation by the House Intelligence Committee. Where do things stand now over there?
I've been on the House Intel Committee now for 5 years, and we are so polarized in the House Intel Committee. And, I think that our investigation was doomed from day one when our chairman sneaked out in the middle of the night to go to the White House. I think that it sort of has really was the demise of our investigation. I think it prematurely ended. I think that it just goes to show how important it is that Mueller's investigation is allowed to continue, because ours was so polarizing. And so, I mean, the fact is that we sat there for over a year listening to the same facts, and yet we have a Republican report and a Democratic report when facts should be facts. And I think that that's a huge letdown to the American people. And I think that the polarization that we've had around the Russia investigation has bleed over to how we're dealing with each other on the Intel Committee generally. And when you think about the fact that we have broad oversight over a host of issues, it's pretty frightening. And, you know, I can tell you that when I first got on that committee, national security should be nonpartisan. You would hope that all of us would sort of leave our political stuff at the door and really focus on what's in the best interest of the American people. And I can tell you that it's been really tainted because of this investigation, or lack thereof.
I had this conversation with one of our Asian allies, which I think kind of ties together your 2 points in what the consequence of us not pursuing the Russian interference in our democracy in a way that isn't partisan, in a way that looks at it as the foreign threat that it is. This Asian ally said to us, you know, it does not appear that America is interested in defending its own democracy. What assurances do we have that you'll be helping us do the same for ours? And that was stunning to me. And it goes to that crisis of confidence, right? We've always been providing that leadership, building the institutions, you know, providing both the value leadership, but also the tools and the ability to do that. And now the world's questioning our commitment to the founding principle of this country. It's an astonishing place to find yourself.
What more should we be doing? The administration finally got around to sanctioning some Russian entities and individuals under the authority that Congress passed last summer. What other steps do you think we should be taking with regard to thwarting this asymmetric aggression that the Russians are engaged in, both, as I said, in Western democracies, but also we see in Syria and other places?
And it isn't just the Russians that are engaged in it. Now I saw something recently that said that now that we've pulled out of JCPOA, Iran is stepping up its cyber attacks as well. So we need to make those investments, have tighter partnerships with the private sector to build up our cyber defenses, outline for ourselves how far we're willing to go when it comes to cyber offense, and what does that look like. And, you know, cybercom's like 10 years on. I mean, we got to pick that pace up. You know, in this space, life cycle products are 18 months. We've taken 10 years to build a response, and we're still in the process of writing out billets for it. I mean, that's too slow. So we need to pick up our pace on building that out. And then I think the other thing is we have to be able to have this conversation about what Russia did in a way that isn't partisan. And I think maybe we're too far beyond that, but it's gotten to the point where our local, our state election monitor or election organizations aren't willing to invest in new technology to harden their election systems because they feel like that's taking a position in this debate.
But Stephanie, we've had, what's been a year, our agencies came out, the 17 agencies came out and unequivocally said that they meddled in our elections. And we've taken, between the Senate and the House, 800 votes since then. And not one have been about how we're going to shore up our election infrastructure. Okay, let's put the whole Russia investigation to one side. What are we doing to invest in making sure that the myriad of election infrastructures that are critical infrastructures, as designated by the Obama administration, what are we doing to shore that up? We need a minimum cyber standard. We need to have a fully engaged Homeland Security that is actually working to do that. I know I have several bills, others have several bills. None of that has even reached the level of an agenda item to be debated about, let alone voted on, and yet we're less than 6 months away from the midterm elections. They're going to do it again. That's exactly what our intelligence agency said, and they're doing it to democracies and non-democracies all around the world.
Dennis, you raised the the strength of alliances and the traditional, and particularly the post-World War II, commitment by Democrats and Republicans to keeping strong alliances. I think one of the characteristics of this president is he's really doesn't care that much about it. Said so in the campaign and has indicated that in his dealings with our strongest, most traditional allies like the UK, France, Germany, Japan, and others. What is the withdrawal from the JCPOA that you put so much blood, sweat, and tears into due to U.S. credibility with respect to what our allies can count on us to do?
Well, I'll say one thing, John, on the last topic, just real quickly. I was really heartened to see in the omnibus there was money, thanks to a lot of the House Democrats and to Senate Democrats like Senator Warner and Senator Klobuchar, for the FBI, for enhanced defense, and then also, importantly, for the states. I think Stephanie makes a good point, which is our states are still trying to figure out how they take this money without being seen as making a statement, but there is a heightened degree of concern at the state level now, which is exactly what we were trying to get attention to before. On this question of JCPOA, John, the important thing about alliances isn't that you always agree. The important thing about alliance management is that people aren't surprised and people understand. And the thing that strikes me about the current experience that we're having with the reaction to the JCPOA is that it appears to me that our allies don't understand why we did what we did. And it does also appear that some of the allies who had been here visiting were also surprised. And the president, as you know, John, spends a lot of time on alliance management because you're not going to go ask somebody to do something without having spent a lot of time with them in the meantime. And so what exactly the fallout is here of this, I worry goes beyond the question of Iran, which is important enough, and maybe goes to broader questions of reliability precisely because of these two factors, namely, they don't really understand why we did what we did, and they were quite surprised by what we did. And that has echoes in the North Korea crisis. So, look, I know there's a lot of people in the administration working really hard on this, Secretary Mattis among others, and so that work should not be underestimated, but we have to get back to a point where we're not confusing and surprising our allies.
You raised North Korea. Let's talk for a second about North Korea. President's getting some credit for bringing Kim Jong-un to the table. Whether it's deserved or not, I'm a little bit skeptical. It seems like Kim Jong-un's setting the tempo, starting really at the first of the year, about how this dialogue is going. But let's give them credit. At least they're talking. But it is very unclear what the end game looks like, what denuclearization looks like. Maybe, Terry, starting with you, and Stephanie, you might want to ask, what's Congress's role in advance of the summit, which will occur in June in Singapore, to set the terms of what the administration's policy should be with respect to what we want to expect out of a deal, if there is to be a deal in North Korea?
I think we clearly should be helping to set some parameters. That's really, but the leadership starts at the executive level, and I think that from where I sit, it's I'm a little nervous that our president is unpredictable. We started this whole his administration talking about the North Korean leader as little man, or what did he call him?
Yeah, little rocket man.
Little rocket man. And now all of a sudden, he's giving him kudos and deference. And frankly, it played well in Alabama that he had 3 of those dissidents come home. Mm-hmm. And I think that a policy can't just be about optics and photo ops. It really has to be grounded in what is our end game, to your point. What is the end game? It has to be denuclearization. And if I am North Korea and I saw what the United States did in getting out of the Iran deal, I mean, what kind of credibility would I give to making a deal with this administration, and for that matter, what does it say for future administrations and our credibility in America? So when I think about our role in Congress, it's definitely a check and a balance, but it also is important that we help to set the parameters of what it is we want to ultimately achieve.
You know, as an American, I'm hopeful that this is a real opportunity for us to halt North Korea's nuclear program. But I am also aware that this isn't the first time that they've come to the table, negotiated terms that were beneficial for them, and then cheated on them. The one difference this time is that they come to the table with both ICBM capability as well as nuclear capability, which in the past they had not had. So they're negotiating from a position of power this time that they had not previously had. And they're negotiating with an administration that is approaching this in a different way than any previous ones. Usually when there's a high-level summit like this, there's a lot of groundwork that is done to build up to the summit. And there's a clear strategy with plan and a comms strategy for your allies, your adversaries, and your domestic politics. And I'm hopeful that that's going on right now, but I'm not sure that it is. But at the end of the day, we want verifiable, irreversible, and denuclearization, but do we have all the right people at the table to ensure that this opportunity is a real one? I'm not sure about that. But from Congress's perspective, obviously using our platform to shape the conversation, but it's hard for us to get into the weeds of the administration and actually do the hard work it takes to get to a successful summit.
Well, there was a lot of hard work and preparation leading up to sanctioning ZTE, the Chinese telecom manufacturer that was found to have violated both Iranian sanctions and North Korean sanctions. And the president did a 180-degree flip-flop over the course of the weekend in a tweet. And now we're reading stories that just a couple days before that, the Trump organization got $500 million in bank loans from China to sponsor a theme park in Jakarta. In any other world, you wouldn't really question whether the president was operating only in the nation's interest. But you raised the issue of predictability. It's so hard to tell what his motivation is sometimes, and his whims and his instinct are. Does it bother you, Dennis, that we have a president that is willing to change course so quickly, so unpredictably?
Well, I think unpredictability is particularly dangerous. One. Two is the thing that concerns me is the relative quiescence of the institutions. Ultimately, we were talking before about how people are feeling increasingly like the system is not working for them. That the historic bargain of playing by the rules means you'll get a fair shot seems increasingly empty. Part of that is because the institutions have not been as vibrant as I think the Constitution envisions them being. And I think in this case, oversight from Congress, just to kind of transition a bit between the last two, link the last two questions. Implementation of any agreement reached in North Korea will have to be aggressively overseen by Congress. We knew that about the JCPOA. You guys knew that about the agreed framework. We knew that about the Paris Accord. That's what the Constitution demands of Congress. And so what I hope to see is some recognition of the Article I power here, Congress, that it has constitutional responsibilities in this, balance of powers with the president. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that yet.
There's one of the things that I think has been also a break from post-war bipartisan consensus is the embrace of autocrats and the downgrading of human rights as both a foreign policy interest and a foreign policy tool by this administration. Does that give you any concern in terms of can that be reset if with a new president, which hopefully we'll have in 2021, or does this cause any long-term damage to the way publics perceive the United States?
No, I think people, the good news is that the rest of the world, as is also the case here in the US, people see this as atraditional behavior. And so a return to traditional values-based foreign policy of the type that Stephanie talked about, I think will be not confusing, but rather refreshing. And so I don't worry about it, about unringing that bell as much, especially, by the way, if we start to see the other branches of the government executing their powers.
You know, I'm sitting here today because of this unique combination of American power and generosity, and because the U.S. Navy rescued my family when we were escaping Vietnam by boat, and so and they were in the South China Sea, ensuring freedom of navigation, far away from a home port, but demonstrating power in this region. And when they saw these desperate strangers, they exhibited the generosity and grace that I know is a part of what America is. And I think at the end of the day, we will have leaders that come in and out, we will have Congresses that change majorities, but I deeply believe that those core values that brought me to where I am today will be the true north that America pulls back to.
You know, the other thing that we have to think about is the effect our policies have on our allies. I mean, the reality is that what made the Iran deal so palatable was that it was a multilateral agreement, and we entered that with our allies. And while I know that there is great, people do expect changing of administration changes, but I do believe that there may be some lasting effects on our allies and whether or not they can, count on us when we enter into these agreements, because we're walking away from not just one, we've walked away from a few, and I think that may have some lasting effect. And yes, Congress has great oversight, but we can't do this alone. We are leaders in the global arena, but we are not alone in our actions in the global arena.
Can I ask you one last question of all of you? Have we forfeited our voice, particularly in the Middle East peace process, to basically be able to be credible in trying to reduce violence that we've seen in Gaza, over the last few days as the embassy move has occurred? Have we, again, this is a change from both Democrats and Republicans, but do we maintain any credibility in trying to reduce the level of violence that's going on right now?
I think the situation is calling for U.S. action. I thought Martin Indyck's comments earlier today about seeing if there's not a way to work what appears to be a more energetic relationship with the Egyptians, to see if we can assume a more traditional American role here in tamping down the violence to try to buy some space and time. So I don't know that we've forfeited it for good, John, but it strikes me that the situation calls out for American involvement and leadership, and I'm quite confused as to why Secretary Pompeo and others haven't taken that role.
I agree that it does call out for American leadership, but one of the things I think we can't discount is that the images of the last couple of days of our administration, happily unveiling at the embassy celebrations, contrasted with the humanitarian, plight of the Palestinians and the violence. I think that doesn't have an impact on the Arab Muslim world, and the willingness of folks who might have otherwise been a helpful voice in this situation, we can't discount the negative impact that that's had.
Terri, any last words?
Well, I just think that the resiliency that is America, we have to always remind ourselves. Our democracy is strong. It's not perfect, but it is a strong democracy that I think I'm just reminded that we have to, take our leadership role seriously, take our allies seriously, but take our roles, our respective roles, be they the journalist that has to, one of the things that I think is really promising from this administration is we're seeing investigative journalism like we've never seen before. And I think that's a good thing. I think that we've seen activism and civic engagement and civic informedness. Alabama elected a Democratic senator. There's hope. And so I think that we just, have to be encouraged by the resilience that is our democracy.
Hear, hear.
Thank you all for your service to our country, and thank you for coming
John.
here today to
Thank you, John.
participate in this conference.
That was fun.